The space station hung in the darkness between three moons, its metal hull gleaming under the light of two distant stars. Inside the observation deck, Zethkari stared at the screens showing the battle below. His four eyes moved quickly between the displays, watching human ships fight against the Vorthan Empire's massive fleet. Something was wrong. The human communications had gone completely silent 15 minutes ago. Zethkari's long fingers tapped against his console as he tried to understand what he was seeing. The human ships moved like they were dancing, spinning, and turning in perfect harmony. But there were no radio signals between them, no orders, no battle chatter, nothing. "This makes no sense," he whispered to himself. On the main screen, Admiral Marcus Kane's flagship, the Liberty, rolled to avoid a massive blast from a Vorthan warship. Three smaller human ships moved at the exact same moment, creating a perfect attack formation. They fired their weapons together, destroying the enemy ship in a brilliant flash of light. How did they know to do that without talking to each other? Guy had been watching space battles for over 30 years. He had seen every species in the galaxy fight. The Korthons used complex battle songs to coordinate their fleets. The Malari sent thousands of data packets every second between their ships. Even the simple Brelic species chirped constantly during combat. But humans? They just went quiet and somehow became 10 times more dangerous. Down in the battle zone, Lieutenant Commander Amy Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Liberty. She watched Captain Ben Murphy pace back and forth, his jaw tight with concentration. The Vorthan ships were closing in from all sides, and twice as many ships and 3 times the firepower. "Captain," the communications officer called out, "Admiral Kane is asking for our status." Murphy stopped pacing. He looked at the tactical display, showing enemy ships surrounding them like hungry wolves. Amy could see something change in his eyes, something old and cold. "Cut all communications," Murphy said quietly. "Tell all ships to go silent." "Sir," the communications officer asked, "you heard me? No more radio chatter. No more status reports. Tell every ship in the fleet to trust their instincts and watch each other's backs." Amy felt a chill run down her spine. She had served under Murphy for 3 years, but she had never heard him speak like this. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it that made her think of ancient things. Dark forests, hunting packs, things that moved in the shadows. The bridge fell silent, except for the quiet hum of the engines. Amy watched the tactical display and realized she could feel where the other human ships were without looking at the screen. It was like having extra senses she never knew existed. On the observation station, Stakari watched the human fleet spread out in a pattern that looked random but felt somehow perfect. The Vorthan commanders were probably confused. Their enemy had stopped communicating right when they should be coordinating their defense. The Vorthons attacked in waves, expecting to crush the smaller human force with overwhelming numbers. But something impossible happened instead. The human ships moved like they were parts of the same creature. When one ship dove down to avoid enemy fire, 2 others automatically moved to cover its flanks. When the Liberty rolled left to attack a Vorthon cruiser, every other human ship in the area shifted position to support the attack without being asked. They were hunting. Zethkar realized this with a shock that made his alien blood run cold. These weren't civilized beings using technology to fight a war. These were predators who had temporarily forgotten how to use words and remembered something much older. The human ships began picking off enemy vessels one by one. They used tactics that no military academy taught. They moved in ways that made no logical sense, but somehow worked perfectly. 3 human fighters would surround a single Vorthan ship, forcing it to turn toward what looked like empty space. But another human ship would be waiting there. Having somehow known exactly where the enemy would go, Amy Rodriguez felt it too. Standing on the bridge of the Liberty, she could sense the other ships around her like they were extensions of her own body. When Captain Murphy pointed at an enemy cruiser, she somehow knew that 2 human destroyers were already moving to attack it from behind. "How are we doing this?" she whispered. Murphy turned to look at her, and Amy saw something in his eyes that made her take a step back. It wasn't human anymore. It was something much older and more dangerous. Remembering, he said softly. The battle lasted for hours. When it was over, the Vorthan fleet was completely destroyed. The humans had lost only 2 ships and suffered minimal casualties. The strangest part was that they had accomplished this impossible victory without saying a single word to each other for the last 3 hours of combat. As soon as the last enemy ship exploded, the human communications came back online. Voices filled the radio channels again, asking for damage reports and casualty counts. It was like someone had flipped a switch, turning them back into the civilized spacefaring species they pretended to be. But Svethkar had seen what they really were underneath all that civilization. He had watched them hunt like a pack of ancient wolves, coordinating through instincts that were millions of years old. He started typing his report to the Galactic Council, but his hands were shaking. How do you explain to a galaxy full of prey species that their allies were actually the most dangerous predators in known space? How do you tell them that humans only pretended to be civilized until they decided to hunt? The worst part was that the humans probably didn't even understand what they had done. They thought it was just good teamwork and military training. They had no idea that they had reverted to something that would terrify every other species in the galaxy. Zethkari finished his report and sent it to the council with a priority rating he had never used before. Then he sat back in his chair and watched the human ships form up into neat formations, their crews probably chatting and joking, like nothing had happened. But he would never forget what he had seen when they went quiet. And he suspected the council wouldn't either. 3 months had passed since the battle at Kepler 442, and Zethkari had not slept well since sending his report. The Galactic Council had read his observations about human combat behavior, but most representatives thought he was exaggerating. How could an entire species suddenly become more dangerous by staying quiet? And the reports started coming in from everywhere. The siege of Proxima Station changed everything. Colonel Jake Morrison had only 200 human soldiers defending the mining facility against 2,000 Vorthan warriors. The enemy had surrounded the station completely, cutting off all escape routes. It should have been a massacre, but something happened that made the council finally pay attention. Quilith. The council's military analyst sat in her office reviewing the combat recordings for the 5th time. Her scaled hands moved across the control panel, rewinding the footage to the moment when everything changed. On the screen, she watched Colonel Morrison's troops take defensive positions around the station. The Vorthans were advancing from all sides, their weapons firing constantly. The human soldiers were outnumbered 10-1, and their ammunition was running low. Then Morrison gave an order that made no sense. All units, radio silence. Trust your gut and watch each other's backs. Within seconds, every human voice on the communication channels went quiet. The Vorthons probably thought they had jammed the human radio systems, advancing, expecting to overwhelm the small defensive force with their superior numbers. That was their mistake? Quailith watched as the humans began moving in patterns that defied military logic. Small groups of soldiers would leave their defensive positions and disappear into the station's corridors. Others would shift to new locations without being ordered. It looked like chaos, but there was something underneath it that felt organized and purposeful. The Vorthans entered the station, expecting to find confused and disorganized defenders. Instead, they found empty rooms and silent corridors. Then the humans began their hunt. It wasn't a battle. Was an extermination. The humans moved through the station like ghosts, peering behind enemy groups and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. They used the station's layout like they had built it themselves, even though most of them had never been there before. Somehow they all seemed to know exactly where their teammates were and what they were doing. Quilith paused. The recording at the moment when a group of 20 Vorthon soldiers entered the main corridor. The thermal sensors showed 3 humans hiding inside passages, but they hadn't communicated with each other in over an hour. Yet all 3 moved at exactly the same moment, attacking from different directions in perfect coordination. The Vorthans were eliminated in seconds. This same pattern repeated throughout the station. Human soldiers who couldn't see each other and hadn't spoken in hours somehow coordinated. Attacks with timing that would have been impossible even with advanced computer systems. The siege lasted 6 hours. When it was over, all 2,000 Vorthon warriors were dead or captured. The humans had lost only 12 soldiers. But the strangest part was the footage from the security cameras. Quileth had watched humans fight before. They usually talked constantly during combat, sharing information and coordinating through voice commands. They were loud, aggressive, and relied heavily on technology. But these humans were different. They moved silently through the corridors, communicating through tiny gestures and subtle looks. Sometimes they seemed to know what their teammates were doing without any signals at all. It was like watching a pack of predators who had hunted together for years. Captain Danny Clark arrived at the council station 2 weeks after the Proxima incident. He was supposedly there for routine meetings. But Quileth suspected the humans were getting nervous about all the questions being asked. She met with him in her office. Surrounded by screens showing combat footage from human engagements across the galaxy, Danny looked uncomfortable as he watched his fellow humans moving in ways that seemed almost inhuman. What exactly happens when your people go quiet during combat? Quileth asked directly. Danny was silent for a long moment, staring at a screen that showed human soldiers coordinating a complex ambush without speaking. Finally, he sighed and looked at her with tired eyes. "We remember," he said quietly. "Remember what? What we used to be. Before cities and technology and civilization, humans spent millions of years as hunters, you know. We didn't survive on our world by being the strongest or the fastest. We survived by working together and never giving up." Quileth felt a chill run through her scaled body. "You're talking about pack hunting behavior?" Danny nodded slowly. "When things get really bad, when we're outnumbered or outgunned, something old kicks in. We stop thinking like individuals and start thinking like a group. We can sense where our teammates are and what they're planning without talking. It's like having extra senses that most humans don't even know they have. But how is that possible?" "Evolution," Danny said simply. "Your species evolved from prey animals. You developed technology to survive, but humans, we were the things that other animals ran from. We hunted in groups across entire continents, following herds for thousands of miles. We could coordinate attacks through subtle signals and body language. We never forgot how to be predators." Quileth stared at the screens showing human combat footage. Suddenly everything made sense. The perfect timing, the wordless coordination, the way they seemed to know what their enemies would do before they did it. These weren't advanced military tactics. This was millions of years of evolution kicking in when humans felt truly threatened. "Does your government know about this?" she asked. Danny shrugged. "Most humans think it's just good teamwork and training. They don't realize they're tapping into something much older. The military brass knows there's something special about how we fight, but they don't understand what it really is. And when you go silent, that's when the old programming takes over completely. We stop being civilized and start being what we really are underneath. Apex predators who can coordinate like a single organism." Quileth spent the rest of the day reviewing combat reports from across human space. The pattern was everywhere once. She knew what to look for. Every time humans faced overwhelming odds, they went quiet and became something that terrified their enemies. She realized the galaxy had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed humans were just another species with good technology and fighting spirit, but humans weren't like the other council races. They weren't evolved prey animals who had learned to fight. They were evolved predators who had learned to pretend to be civilized. That night, Quileth sent an emergency report to the council leadership. Her message was simple. Humanity needed to be studied and monitored, not because they were enemies, but because the galaxy had never dealt with anything like them before. They had allied themselves with the most dangerous species in known space, and most of them didn't even realize it yet. The warning came at dawn on New Montana. General Lisa Stone stood in the command center watching the radar screens fill with red dots. 50,000 Vorthon warriors were dropping from the sky in landing pods, scattered across the entire continent. Her defense force had only 5,000 soldiers. The odds were impossible, but Lisa had seen impossible before. Ma'am, her communications officer called out. The Vorthons are jamming all our long-range communications. Can't contact the Council fleet. Lisa nodded, her eyes still fixed on the screens. The enemy had planned this well. Cut off the human colony, overwhelmed them with numbers, and finish the job before help could arrive. It was a good strategy against most species, but the Vorthons had made one critical mistake. They thought New Montana was just another human, a military outpost with a few thousand soldiers and some civilians to protect. They didn't realize they had just invaded a world full of predators. Send a message to all military units, Lisa said. Quietly, and broadcast it on all civilian channels too. Tell everyone to go dark. No radio communications, no electronic signals, nothing. Tell them to trust their instincts and work together. The communications officer looked confused. Ma'am, if we cut communications, how will we coordinate the defense? Lisa smiled, and there was something in that smile that made the young officer take a step back. We won't need to coordinate. We'll just need to hunt. Within minutes, every human voice on New Montana went silent. The planet's 2 million colonists stopped using radios, stopped sending messages, stopped making any electronic noise at all. To the Vorthons monitoring their communications, it looked like the humans had given up or been knocked out by the jamming. That was exactly what Lisa wanted them to think. Major Alex Turner crouched in the forest outside Settlement 7, watching. A group of Vorthon soldiers marched down the main road. He had 12 soldiers with him, but they hadn't spoken a word in over an hour. They didn't need to. Alex could feel where each of his team members was positioned without looking. Johnson was behind the big oak tree to his left. Martinez was up in the rocks to his right. The others were spread out in a perfect ambush formation that they had created without a single hand signal or whispered word. The Vorthons were talking loudly as they walked, discussing their plans to capture the settlement. They had no idea. They were being watched by eyes that had been hunting in forests like this for millions of years. Alex didn't give a signal to attack. He didn't need to. When the moment was right, when the enemy was in the perfect position, all 13 humans moved at exactly the same time. The Vorthons were eliminated before they could even raise their weapons. Across the planet, the same scene, played out hundreds of times. Vorthon units would enter what they thought were abandoned towns and empty forests, only to be picked off by humans who moved like ghosts and struck like lightning. Dr. Susan Blake had been running the colony's medical center for 6 years. She was a doctor, not a soldier. But when the invasion began, something old and cold awakened inside her. She found herself moving through the hospital corridors with a silence that felt natural, checking on patients who somehow knew to stay quiet without being told. Even the children understood. Tommy Chen, only 8 years old, helped his mother move the medical supplies to hidden locations throughout the building. He didn't speak, but he seemed to know exactly where to put everything and when to move. It was like he had inherited the memory of 1,000 generations of human hunters. Susan watched from a window as a group of Vorthon soldiers approached the hospital. There were 20 of them, armed with energy weapons and wearing full battle armor. Under normal circumstances, they should have been able to capture the building easily, but these weren't normal circumstances. The Vorthons entered the hospital, expecting to find scared civilians and maybe a few defensive positions. Instead, they found empty rooms and silent corridors. The humans had disappeared like smoke, but Susan knew they were still there. She could feel them moving through the building, coordinating without words, preparing for something the enemy would never see coming. The first Vorthon squad made it to the 3rd floor before they realized they were being hunted. By then it was too late. The humans struck from every direction at once, using medical equipment as weapons and turning the hospital's layout into a deadly maze. When it was over, all 20 Vorthons were down. The humans had suffered no casualties, but the strangest part was how naturally it had all happened. Doctors, nurses, maintenance workers, and even patients had all moved together, like parts of the same hunting organism, people who had never held weapons in their lives had somehow known exactly what to do and when to do it. 3 days into the invasion, the Vorthon commanders were getting desperate. They had expected to overwhelm the human colony and ours, but instead they were losing troops steadily to an enemy they couldn't see or understand. From their command ship in orbit, General Krekstar watched the reports come in. Entire battalions were disappearing without sending distress signals. Patrols would enter human settlements and simply vanish. The few survivors who made it back told impossible stories about humans who moved without sound and attacked without warning. "Many troops have we lost?" Krekstar asked his aide. "Over 30,000, sir. And we still haven't taken a single major population center. The humans aren't fighting like any species we've encountered before." Krekstar studied the tactical displays. The human positions made no sense from a military perspective. They weren't fortifying defensive points or protecting strategic resources. Instead, they seemed to be spread out across the entire planet in a pattern that looked random but felt somehow organized. "It's like they're not defending territory," he muttered. "It's like they're hurting us." His aide looked confused. "Sir, look at the pattern of our losses. Every time we advance on what looks like a weak position, we get hit from 3 different directions. Every time we try to consolidate our forces, small human groups appear out of nowhere and pick off our scouts. They're not fighting a defensive war, they're hunting us." Down on the planet, Lisa Stone stood in what used to be the colony's main communication center. The building was dark and quiet, but she could feel the presence of thousands of her people scattered across the continents. They were all connected somehow. It's all part of the same vast hunting network that covered the entire world. She didn't need reports to know how the battle was going. She could sense it in her bones. The Vorthons were being systematically eliminated by an enemy they couldn't understand or fight. It expected to face soldiers and found themselves being stalked by an entire world full of predators. In 72 hours, it would all be over. The Vorthon invasion force would be completely destroyed. Not by superior technology or numbers, but by something much older and more dangerous. The humans of New Montana had remembered what they really were, and underneath all their civilization and technology, had become what their ancestors were millions of years ago, the most successful pack. Hunters in the history of their world, and now they were hunting among the stars. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called after the reports from New Montana reached the capital. Representatives from 47 different species filled the great chamber, their voices creating a mix of sounds that hurt human ears. But Ambassador Helen Carter sat quietly in the center of it all, watching alien faces that showed fear, confusion, and something that looked like terror. Council Chairman Velteth raised his forearms for silence. The chamber grew quiet, but Helen could feel the tension in the air like electricity before a storm. "We are here to discuss the events on New Montana," Velteth announced. 50,000 Vorthon warriors were sent to capture a human colony. Within 72 hours, they were all dead or missing. The human casualties numbered less than 300. Murmurs filled the chamber. Several representatives made clicking sounds that Helen had learned meant distress in their languages. "The humans fought without communication systems," continued Velteth. "Without central command. Without any of the coordination methods that civilized warfare requires. Yet they achieved a victory that should have been impossible." Representative Zorthak from the Pelion Collective stood up, his 6 eyes focused. "On Helen, Ambassador Carter, what weapon did your people use? What new technology allowed such a victory?" Helen looked around the chamber at faces that belonged to dozens of different species. Some had evolved from creatures that grazed in herds. Others came from small animals that hid in burrows. A few had descended from sea creatures that filtered nutrients from water. All of them were prey animals that had learned to use tools and build civilizations. None of them understood what humans really were. "We didn't use any new weapons," Helen said simply. "We just remembered how to hunt." The chamber erupted in confused chatter. Helen waited for them to quiet down before continuing. "Every species in this council evolved from animals that survived by hiding, running, or eating plants. You developed technology because you needed tools to protect yourselves from predators. But humans are different. We are the predators." Dr. Morbeth, the council's chief xenopsychologist, activated a holographic display showing brain scans and evolutionary charts. Her research over the past months had revealed something that disturbed her to the core. "I have studied every spacefaring species in known space," Morbeth said, her voice shaking slightly. "Humans are unique. They're the only species to achieve interstellar travel while retaining their apex predator biology and psychology." The hologram showed comparative brain scans. Human brains had large sections devoted to hunting, tracking, and pack coordination. The other species had bigger areas for pattern recognition, tool use, and social cooperation of the type used by prey animals. When humans experience extreme stress or danger, their brains shift into what we can only call a hunting mode, Morbeth continued. Their individual consciousness becomes secondary to group awareness. They begin processing information the same way their ancestors did when hunting large game across continents. Commander Chris Powell had arrived at the Council Station the day before. He was supposed to represent the human military, but Helen could see he was struggling with what he had learned about his own species. He looked tired and somehow older than his 35 years. "Commander Powell," Velteth said, "can you explain what happens to humans during these silent periods?" Chris stood up slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "It's hard to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. When the silence starts, you stop thinking about yourself as an individual. You become part of something bigger. You can sense where your teammates are and what they're planning without any communication." "But how is this possible?" asked Representative Yilmar from the Centauri Republic. "Evolution," Chris said simply. "For millions of years, human ancestors hunted in packs. We chased down animals that were bigger and stronger than us by working together perfectly. We developed the ability to coordinate complex strategies through nothing but instinct and subtle body language." He paused, looking around the chamber at alien faces that showed growing alarm. "The thing is, most humans don't even realize we're doing it. To us, it just feels like really good teamwork. We don't know that we're turning into something that would terrify most other species." Dr. Morbeth activated another display showing footage from various human battles. In every case, the same pattern appeared. Humans would go silent, then begin moving with coordination that defied explanation. "What you see here is not military training or advanced technology," she said. "This is a species reverting to its natural state. When humans feel truly threatened, they become what they were, for millions of years, the most efficient pack hunters their world has ever produced." The implications hit the chamber like a shockwave. Several representatives began speaking. At once, their voices filled with panic. "Are you saying humans have been lying to us about their nature?" demanded Zorthak. "No," Helen said firmly. "Most humans genuinely don't understand what happens when we go silent. We think it's just good military coordination. We don't realize we're tapping into something much older and more dangerous." Representative Quillish from the Outer Rim territories stood up, her feathers ruffled with agitation. "My people are descended from creatures that fled from predators like yours. How can we trust allies who might see us as prey?" "Because we choose not to," Chris said quietly. "Humans have spent thousands of years learning to control our predatory instincts. We built civilizations, laws, and moral codes specifically to keep the hunter inside us under control. We only let it out when we're fighting a real enemy." But even as he said the words, Chris knew they sounded hollow. The footage from New Montana showed what humans became when the hunting instinct took over completely. Children had participated in the systematic elimination of enemy forces. Doctors and teachers had coordinated attacks with military precision. An entire world had become one massive predatory organism. Dr. Morbeth brought up her final display, showing psychological profiles of various species. "The truth is that most council races would be physically incapable of what humans do in combat. Our brains are not wired for pack hunting. We cannot coordinate without communication because we evolved to survive as individuals or in small family groups. Humans are the galaxy's only apex predator species," she continued. "They are biologically designed to hunt and kill in coordinated groups. What we have witnessed in recent battles is not aberrant behavior. It is humans functioning exactly as evolution intended them to." The chamber fell silent as the full implications sank in. They had welcomed humanity into the galactic community thinking they were just another species with good technology and fighting spirit. Instead, they had allied themselves with creatures that were biologically programmed to be perfect killers. Veltath looked directly at Helen with his large, dark eyes. Ambassador Carter, what assurance can you give us that humans will not see other council species as prey? Helen met his gaze steadily. The same assurance I can give you, that we won't hunt and eat our own children? Humans have moral codes and ethical systems that are stronger than our instincts. We choose to be civilized. But what happens when those moral codes fail? Asked Quillish. Helen was quiet for a long moment. Around her, representatives from dozens of prey species waited for an answer that might determine the future of the Galactic Alliance. Then you hope we consider you part of our pack instead of something we're hunting, she said finally. The silence that followed was deafening. 6 months after the emergency council session, Captain Ryan Brooks stood on the bridge of the Harmony's edge, watching technicians install the last components of the new alarm system. The device looked simple enough, just a small box with blinking lights, but it represented the council's new reality. They were now officially afraid of their human allies. Captain Brooks called Chief Engineer Vexenal, his tentacles wrapped around a data pad. The human silence detection array is now online. When human communication drops below baseline levels, for 30 seconds during combat operations, all non-human personnel will receive automatic warnings. Ryan nodded, trying not to show how the name of the system bothered him. The council had spent weeks debating what to call it. Some wanted Predator Alert System. Others suggested Human Hunting Protocol. They settled on something that sounded more professional, but everyone knew what it really meant. It was an early warning system for when humans stopped being civilized. The first test came sooner than anyone expected. Pirates had attacked a merchant convoy in the Tau Ceti system, and the Harmony's Edge was the closest council ship. By the time they arrived, the pirates had already captured 2 cargo vessels and were demanding ransom. Ryan stood next to Captain Velcris, the ship's Malari commander, watching the tactical display. The pirate ships were small but numerous, and they had hostages. It would require a careful, coordinated assault to save the civilians without causing unnecessary casualties. Launch fighters, Velcris ordered. Human and Pelion squadrons, coordinate your attack patterns through standard communication protocols. Ryan watched 12 human fighters launch from the Harmony's Edge, followed by 8 Pelion craft. For the first few minutes, everything proceeded normally. The pilots chattered constantly over the radio, sharing targeting data and coordinating their approach. Then something changed. Lieutenant Sarah Phillips was leading the human squadron when she saw the pirates position their ships around the captured merchant vessels. They were using the hostages as shields, making any direct attack impossible. The situation required the kind of precise, coordinated response that military academies taught in advanced courses, but Sarah felt something else stirring inside her. Something that whispered of older solutions to the problem of cornered prey. All human fighters, she said quietly into her radio, go dark. Watch and follow. Within seconds, all 12 human fighters stopped transmitting. Their radio chatter cut off abruptly, leaving only the confused voices of the Pelion pilots asking what was happening. On the bridge of the Harmony's Edge, the new alarm system activated for the first time. Red lights began flashing throughout the ship. A calm, automated voice announced over the intercom, "Attention. Human communication levels have dropped below combat baseline. All non-human personnel are advised to maintain safe distance from human forces until normal communication resumes." "This is not a drill." Captain Velcris looked at Ryan with wide, frightened eyes. "What are your people doing?" Ryan watched the tactical display, seeing the human fighters spread out in a pattern that looked random but felt somehow purposeful. "They're hunting," he said quietly. The human fighters began moving in ways that defied standard combat doctrine. Instead of maintaining formation and coordinating through radio commands, they scattered across the battlefield like a pack of wolves surrounding their prey. The pirates, confused by the sudden silence from half the attacking force, tried to track the human ships but found themselves constantly wrong. Footed Sarah Phillips felt the familiar shift in her consciousness as the hunting instinct took over. She could sense where her 11 squadmates were without looking at her instruments. She knew when they would turn, when they would attack, when they would break off, all without a single word being exchanged. The pirates had made a critical error. They thought the human fighters were like the Pelion craft, dependent on constant communication and coordination through technology. They tried to jam radio signals and disrupt the attack by creating electronic interference, but the humans weren't using radios anymore. They were using something much older and more reliable. The attack was over in 8 minutes. 6 pirate ships were disabled or destroyed, and every hostage was rescued unharmed. The humans accomplished this impossible feat through maneuvers that would have required hundreds of radio transmissions and complex computer calculations for any other species. They did it in complete silence. As soon as the last pirate ship was neutralized, the human fighters suddenly came back online. Radio chatter resumed as if nothing had happened, with pilots asking for damage reports and coordinating their return to the Harmony's edge. But Ryan had seen the fear in Captain Velcris's eyes during those 8 minutes. The Malari commander had watched 12 human fighters coordinate a perfect assault without saying a word, and he finally understood what his species had allied itself with. 3 weeks later, the Council officially implemented Emergency Protocol 7 across all joint military operations. The Human Silence Detection Array was installed on every ship, station, and outpost where humans served alongside other species. Lieutenant Sarah Phillips received new orders assigning her to command the first all-human rapid response unit. Silent Company, as it came to be known, was specifically designed to operate in the apex predator state. Their job was to handle situations where conventional forces had failed and normal military tactics were insufficient. The unit's operating procedures were unlike anything in the Council's military history. When Silent Company was deployed, all other species were required to evacuate a 50-kilometer radius around the combat zone, not because the humans might lose, but because they might not be able to tell friend from foe once the hunting instinct fully engaged. Sarah stood in the briefing room of her new command ship, looking at the 12 other pilots who had been selected for Silent Company. They were all experienced fighters who had demonstrated the ability to operate effectively during silence periods. But more importantly, they were humans who understood what they became when they stopped talking. "Our job is simple," Sarah told her squadron. "We go where other forces can't. We fight battles that can't be won through normal means. And we do it by remembering what we really are underneath all this technology and civilization." One of her pilots, Captain Mike Torres, raised his hand. "Ma'am, what about the other Council species? How do they feel about having a unit like this?" Sarah smiled, but there was something cold in that smile. "They're terrified of us. And honestly, they should be. When we go silent, we become something that their species spent millions of years trying to avoid. We become apex predators in space." The Council's official records classified Silent Company as a specialized tactical unit for extreme combat situations. But everyone knew what they really were the Council's acknowledgement that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the galaxy was a human who had stopped talking. The alarm system became standard equipment throughout Council space. New recruits learned to recognize the warning signs of human silence periods. Tactical manuals included chapters on how to safely withdraw when human forces entered hunting mode. It was the galaxy's acceptance of a simple truth: humanity's greatest strength in war didn't come from their technology or their courage. It came from their ability to become what their ancestors had been for millions of years: the most efficient pack hunters in the history of their world. The special alarm wasn't just a safety measure. It was a reminder that in a galaxy full of prey species, the humans were something else entirely. And when they went quiet, it meant they had stopped pretending to be anything other than what evolution had made them: the perfect predators among the stars.